Hi, I'm Reeza Thomson. In recent years, there has been a growing amount of information on abusive relationships, toxic partners, narcissists. And yet, when another story about an abusive relationship surfaces in the media or in our circles, quite a lot of people actually wonder and ask the same question. Why didn't they leave that horrible person? Today, I'd like to offer a perspective on how a victim feels in such relationships and answer the question why people like that can't actually leave the relationship when they're being abused. We're talking about emotional abuse here, of course. Let's look into the terminology. You've probably encountered relationships where people have let you down, manipulated your emotions, manipulated certain situations around you, devalued your achievements, give you the silent treatment, or broke their promises to you. However, occasional negative behavior like that isn't actual abuse. So what is abuse? Emotional abuse in relationships has several distinct features. They are periodic, they are cyclical, and involve one party feeling frightened or seeing significant amount of discomfort. Speaking of the cycle of abuse, abusive relationships always follow exactly the same predictable pattern, and there are 5 main stages there. So the first stage is idealization. The abuser places the victim on a pedestal, idolizing them. And the overwhelming flow of love can feel confusing, even though a voice in the victim's head sometimes keeps asking, what's wrong here? There must be a catch here. Why are they giving me all this attention? And abusers tend to confess love quickly and rush the relationship. It's also called love bombing. They might insist on seeing you almost every day. Often they text you a lot, they call you a lot, or even suggest moving in together just maybe a month after they met you. They encourage the other person to rush into the relationship, and they tend to use dramatic phrases like, I've never been in love like this before, or I've never met anyone like you, and so on and so forth. The second stage is rising tension. Since the person who is the victim in this cause cannot be perfect, just like any other person, idealization switches to disappointment. So the abuser starts displaying the disappointment as such. Stressful situations in the victim's life, like the ones involving children or work issues, make the abuser feel ignored, hurt, or annoyed. So they act like a victim and their anger builds up. The actual victim may either try to soften the tension or inadvertently provoke it. The third stage is active abuse. The abuser lashes out, whether through insults or criticism, psychological humiliation, infidelity, or disappearing without explanation. And common phrases include, you made me do this, or I was normal before I met you, or you don't have time for me, so I'm not important, etc. Essentially, they blame the victim and do not take responsibility for their own actions. Stage 4 is a reconciliation. The abuser fears that the victim will leave them, so they attempt to undo the damage. They offer gifts, make pledges, joke about the situation, promise to change, minimize or deny the incident. And denial in such cases is a tactic known as gaslighting. In other words, the abuser tries to keep the relationship under control, and nobody can end it until they decide to do so. Stage number 5. It's called calm or honeymoon. This phase is the hardest yet most desired by the victim. And during the honeymoon, the abuser might make promises to change or promise to change their behavior, spend more time with the victim or help around the house, assuring the victim with words like, I'm changing because of you, and even may agree to go to couples therapy. The victim in this case wanted to hear promises in order to agree to continue the relationship. Usually none of these promises are delivered or completed, but the relationship goes on, and the victim continues to hope that the abuser will change. Then the cycle repeats, but without the initial idealization. And over time, the abuser's words and actions become less genuine, the abuse cycle shortens, and things escalate until the victim decides to leave, or the abuser finds a new object. This relationship can go on for months or even for years. How does a person feel in an abusive relationship? Psychological abuse is not always easy to recognize. It can be hard to accept that someone close to you, with whom you try to build a nice relationship with, might be a pathological liar, lack empathy, repeatedly let you down, and ignore your needs. So we're conditioned to think of abuse as physical since it's visible and can be documented, like bruises and scars. Emotional abuse is subtle and creeps in gradually. Initially, the victim might brush off the hurtful jokes or inappropriate comments, find excuses for the abuser, and try to manage on their own. The abuser is highly skilled at love bombing, making the victim believe this loving side is their true nature. When the mask begins to slip and abuse happens, the victim blames themselves for angering the partner. Here are some signs of an abusive relationship. One of them is neglect. The abuser rarely cares about the victim's needs, except during the reconciliation or the so-called honeymoon phases, and the victim often can't rely on them. For instance, the abuser might promise to spend family time together or go and do something together, and then provoke an argument to avoid doing what they promised. Another sign is control. The abuser may be pathologically jealous, criticize the victim's friends and family, or even forbid contact with them. The third sign is double standards. What the abuser is allowed to do, the victim is not. One partner has more freedom or power than the other one. And if the victim is financially dependent, they might receive money only for essentials, while the abuser indulges themselves and can buy whatever they want. Or the victim might be psychologically forced to give all of their earnings to the partner. For example, some men could be told by their partners that they are not allowed to spend any money from the joint bank account without the permission, although they contribute a decent amount on a regular basis. Another sign is bad exes. The abuser's previous partners are always painted as stupid, greedy, or messy, cheaters, alcoholics, or narcissists. This makes the victim feel like they're the chosen one, like they're the best thing in the world. And number 5, frightened anger. When the victim avoids conflict, knowing that any disagreement will lead to verbal abuse or threats, abusers may kick things like slamming the door or kick objects off the nearest surface like a table or a desk and make threats. Another sign is placating behavior. The victim accepts that their role is secondary and tries not to anger the abuser, carefully choosing words, and it's often called walking on shells. But it's impossible to prevent the irritable reaction from their partner anyway, and it doesn't matter what they do, the partner gets always irritated. Sign number 7, conditional relationship. Abusers make conditions and say statements like, I'll have to sleep with others if you don't satisfy me, or I'll spend time with the kids if you get all the housework done properly and make dinner on time. So it's constant conditions, and only then something would be done by the abuser or complied with. There are more signs, including devaluation. Remarks such as, what's wrong with your mood? Or look at those fat thighs. Sometimes it's disguised as admiration. For example, with that brain of yours, you could have been a director at your work by now. Next sign is emotional roller coaster. Alternating between reward and punishment, the relationship becomes addictive. The brain's hormone levels fluctuate, with cortisol spiking during stress and dopamine rising when the victim is given praise. Unpredictable rewards release more dopamine than predictable ones, and the victim gets hooked on these emotional ups and downs. Their life then feels boring without all of these ups and downs, and hence the addiction. Another sign is endless arguments. The same arguments reoccur without resolution, making the victim feel trapped. And the victim feels responsible for all the arguments, no matter who actually caused the argument in reality. Then there is another sign as hostile humor. Sarcasm and jokes mask resentment, where the victim avoids direct confrontation. Another sign is loss of identity. The victim forgets their needs and interests to appease the abuser. They're consumed by the relationship, and that leads them to a sense of burnout. Their behavior is automatically aimed at pleasing the partner, and no matter what, and no matter what happens, and their own needs and their own requirements don't actually appear anywhere. In fact, the victim starts believing that if they want anything for themselves, it makes them selfish, or they come across selfish and they also don't like it. Of course, there is a sign of health issues. Hormonal fluctuations affect physical health, causing migraines, digestive issues, and weakened immune system. So sometimes health issues show that there is a lot of stress. So why are abusive relationships so hard to leave? Abuse is a psychological prison. sometimes compared to authoritarian control tactics, known as the so-called wheel of power or control. It involves exhausting the victim with threats, humiliation, and unpredictable affection. Both men and women can be victims of emotional abuse. A deep emotional bond forms almost like an addiction based on a mix of rewards and punishments. As a result, the victim stays because they're willing to endure anything for the occasional reward and phenomenon known in therapy as trauma bonding. The abuser becomes the source of the strongest emotions in the victim's life, making a breakup feeling like a massive tragedy or a catastrophic event. Even if the victim decides to leave, they may feel depressed, hugely depressed afterwards, as normal relationships don't evoke the same intense highs and lows for them, and the so-called normal relationships feel very boring. What can victims do in this case? Those with experience in abusive relationships often report strange dreams or a physical discomfort around their abuser. So the best advice is to trust your instinct and pay attention to your body and intuition. It's the so-called gut feeling, and it never lies. The body tells you when there's something hugely wrong happening around you. Moving forward, it's a journey. For survivors, therapy often involves rebuilding your self-worth, inner foundation, sensitivity, and the ability to value the so-called boring people, when in fact those boring people are actually emotionally healthy and normal people. And this kind of people are the ones who will not abuse anybody. And it's important for the therapist to assure that the survivor is not the one to be blamed. And it's important to explore what exact trauma led them to an abuser. And they end up constantly needing external validation. We need to find out why and how we ended up there. Another challenge is unexpressed anger. The survivor may want to punish or get revenge on the abuser because simply forgetting and moving on feels impossible. It just doesn't register. So the anger must be acknowledged and addressed in a therapeutic space to help the survivor cope, to then truly to be able to move on. If you're interested in the ways therapy can help to remove yourself from emotional abuse and to move on with your life, how to make sure you prevent any abuse in future and can actually have a peaceful life with a happy relationship, please watch my previous videos on codependent relationships and how to attract the right partner in your life. And if you feel that you're ready to make these changes in your life, feel free to book an appointment with me. Contact details are available on my channel. See you in the next video.